You never thought you'd see this. Iman Gadzhi's life is a curious mix in itself, but one mysterious thing he's mentioned that no one has been able to get to the bottom of is his rich and abusive stepfather. While thanks to some great detective work from YouTuber T Palace is one of the first to dig this up, we now have a window into who Iman's stepdad really was. But first, listen to how Iman Gadzhi's spoken about his stepfather so you know exactly what we're talking about. Make sure to subscribe and let's get into it.
How often would you see your stepfather?
He'd come 2 or 3 months a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was it like when he was staying with you?
Fuck, man, it was terrible. Yeah, I was so scared of him. I still am. He's like the only, which now at this point I know is irrational, but he's just, he's a very powerful man. So, yeah. Not fun.
And that's a kind of vague description of his stepfather. You see, whenever Iman mentions his elusive stepfather, we don't get a name of this person, and we don't even get to see a picture of him in the family. This elusive stepfather in his life is in contrast to the story he tells to his biological father, who Iman says abandoned him early on and never really got to know him. Public records in UK show Iman Gadzhi and his mother have lived in the same London house for some years, and the Indian origin name Anand Jaswal sounds a lot like the Indian origin stepfather that Iman Gadzhi has often referred to.
Because from the age of like 8 or 9, I knew that things were not going to be pretty.
Where was he from, by the way?
He was actually, her family was Indian.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, family was Indian. Grew up in UK though.
Yeah, Indian dads are like disciplined.
Oh,
but generally speaking, they're kind. But I mean, everyone's different. You can't have the whole Indian population be great.
Now we have one lead that matches two of those important criteria. One is their nationality, and the other is history of cohabitating with Iman Gadzhi's mother at one point. If you look up the name Anand Jaswal, you'd be surprised to see how little comes up apart from other court documents and a connection to a man named Ladli Prasad Jaswal, who happens to be his father. And this is where we get a more solid lead about that person and who he originally is. Here's an article from an Indian business magazine in 1998. It discusses how Ladli Jaswal heads the famous Jagatit Industries, which is one of India's largest liquor manufacturers. At the end of the article, it clearly lays out his financial and personal ties all the way from India to the UK. So now we've got our second lead, which is Jagatilt Industries, as well as a person with the last name as Iman's alleged stepfather, and further research tells you the father's name was leaked in the infamous Pandora paper leaks that exposed offshore shell companies of the global rich elite, where he had more than $3 million in an offshore account. A court document from 2012 confirms the relationship between Ladli Jaswal and Anand Jaswal, being the son of the founder of this massive liquor business. And it just so happens when you look up the name on the ICIJ database for the Pandora Papers, something does come up here as well. You see how the data reveals Anand's business ventures registered to the British Virgin Islands, and also realize it says he's linked to the United Arab Emirates. It gets us another step closer to the rich Indian businessman's stepdad that lived in Dubai, but also wanted to have ties to the UK for legal purposes. Iman Gadzhi himself has admitted that his stepdad married his mother mostly for that reason, so he could have some legal family ties to the UK while still being in Dubai.
So anyways, long story short, I actually had like the perfect childhood. Like I was in London, grew up wealthy. I lived in Chelsea in one of his houses. So the thing is, he actually lived in Dubai. So one of the benefits, one of the benefits for him was he got to, basically there was a lot of tax benefits for him, where he got to make sure he wasn't living in the UK technically, but still had ties to the UK because of his family. But
so you just wanted to use your mom.
Basically.
Now, if you look at some of the data from the Jagatilt Industries and Anand's father left after he passed away, you see that it has a market cap of over 13 billion Indian rupees, which is around $155 million. That's how large the company is as one of the primary producers and exporters of liquor products from India. And from a court document from an internal tussle at the company, one key document tells you just how much of the total wealth from his father went to Anand Jaswal. As a petition from Anand, it clearly lists his stake in the company at 11.5%. That would be nearly $15 million for Anand just for this one company, and probably a whole lot more wealth that is unknown and unknown around the world. And Iman Gadzhi himself has been open about how some of that wealth eased the burden on his mother's finances, but he knew he had to take the reins for the family eventually.
Yeah, long story short, I had this super weird childhood where, my mom and stepdad only legally ended up divorcing in 2019, right? So they were together 15 years. Now, for my mom, the main benefit for her was I got to go to private school. which obviously didn't turn out to do much for me in the end anyways. But, I got to go to private school. But apart from that, my stepdad didn't support us in any sense. He ended up cutting us off at by 2010, by 2014, 15, my mom, by 2013-ish, my mom has always been super frugal and always very long-sighted. By 2013, she's working, NHS minimum wage as a receptionist, did that for a few years, bounced around between different jobs. At some point when things got really bad, we were on government benefits. So I had this really weird childhood where I'm going to private school and then I'm coming back home and I live in an SW7 postcode, but I come back home and there's no warm water for the last 3 years of, the time that we were there. There's no warm water, no heating. In the last 2 years, no Wi-Fi.
It's certainly a really interesting look into a character that we hear about so often, but know very little about. And when it comes to someone like Iman who's made tens of millions of dollars at such a young age, it's really worth looking behind the curtain. Let me know in the comments if you agree, because there are certainly lessons here on how a series of events in your family can become a catalyst for a much bigger and longer lasting change in your life.